1947 in the United States of America, pretty much anybody could have made money under those circumstances because everybody did make money. You know, it was the greatest period of prosperity, uninterrupted, the world had ever seen. It wasn't until that, you know, early mid-70s when the rest of the world had caught up finally to having industry again that we started to feel any kind of competition. For him to,
well, you know, I think you're sort of hitting on the story here because we know that wages, real wages, have been declining, you know, for white men since the mid-70s. So it's obvious what they did. It's like when the going got tough, when they started having competition from a rebuilt Japan and Germany and all that, and they decided, well, we'll just attack the middle class of the United States and steal their wealth. Right? We're not gonna get better. We're not gonna get more competitive. You know, we're not going to produce more. We'll just steal the wealth from the middle class, and they've been doing that ever since.
It's been a looting operation. It's like in Goodfellas where they bust out that restaurant. You know, all that's happening is a bust out operation of the American middle class, which is why Tucker Carlson, you know, who is one of the last WASP ruling class guy, and his stepmother is the heir to the Swanson food fortune. So he's, you know, he's not, I don't think he's got like, you know, $1 billion FU money, but he did, you know, grow up in La Jolla, California and spend summers in Maine. This is not a guy who didn't have money growing up. You know, his dad was a journalist or something. And the failure of the ruling class here, and this is what pisses me off about Buffett is sitting here ignoring, like, what's going to happen when, you know, the ruling class of the United States of America is brave Latinx transsexual whammons and you know, all of these other minority people that he is advocating for over his own people and the people who made him wealthy by working so hard in that 25-year period between the late 40s and the early 70s that he spent the last 45 years looting is to get even wealthier is they're just going to take his stuff because that's what happens in those, you know, you know, half the cause of the interventions in the United States is, you know, the Smedley Butler fought in were the local people in, you know, Banana Republic XYZ got tired of working for fruit barons. They stole all the stuff from the fruit barons, said, hey, you know, this isn't fair that you're, you know, just showing up here with capital and stuff and taking over our country and effectively appointing the president and all the judges and stuff and turning this into a little fiefdom. We're taking it. Well, then the Marines get sent in to, you know, restore the property of, you know, oil companies or mining concerns in Chile or, you know, United Fruit down in, wherever that, you know, that particular thing. That's one of the reasons behind the whole annexation of Hawaii was, you know, Dole Pineapple and United Fruit needed someplace to grow bananas and pineapples. You know, but this ruling class, it's not going to continue. You can see it. I mean, Jesse Jackson or Al Sharpton did the same bust out operation. They'll, you know, a big company or a company will be prosperous in Chicago or, in Camden, New Jersey or something. And they'll be like, hey, we can, you know, give us a seat on the board and 10% of the company, or we'll call you racist. And they do. And then the company suffers performances, you know, because of the problems that result from that sort of thing. And then, you know, it's 20% of the company and then it's 30%. And then the company's out of business.
Well, if you look at what is it that they actually provide, because I think there's this narrative where we say that, you know, people are falling for this stuff because they really believe in equality and the rainbow and all that. It's like, well, no, it's like they're bringing votes. You know, these minority representatives are bringing block votes, lots and lots of block votes. And so they're willing to make sacrifices in order to get, you know, all those block votes. And, you know, they think that it's worth it. The price that they pay is worth it. And, you know, because if they end up, you know, having a lot of casualties, you know, white middle class workers that are casualties, it's like, well, we'll go to India to get our programmers. We'll just find, replacements for them elsewhere. If our minorities in this country are brave Latinxes and, you know, black workers, if they can't fulfill these roles, we'll just hire out, you know, throughout the world and get them to do it. So, you To me, everything's
It's-
rational. What they're doing is, they're wanting protection from the legislature. They do these shakedowns from corporate America and say, you need to hire these sort of people. I mean, heck, Chucky Slimes, who was, got on national TV yesterday to read out the impeachment. I mean, he's famous for he chides corporations for not hiring enough of his staff. Right? There's such a revolving door. He's like, well, you corporations need to be hiring my staff more. It's, you need to play the game. You need to bribe me more, me and my staff. So, I mean, it's an utterly corrupt regime. And you're right. It has an expiration date, but these guys think that they'll make out. And you know what? As long as they have money, maybe they will, because money seems to buy everything.
That's the thing. The thing to remember is that this scheme works. And it's not the first time it's been repeated. Even in modern Western history, I mean, it's a scheme that's not terribly unlike the British Empire after the Napoleonic Wars, when they're the uninterrupted hegemon of the continent, and yet the country itself falls into a nearly 20-year depression, while the upper class reaps all of the benefits and becomes truly the first international sort of ruling class. This is the sun never sets on the British Empire crowd. This works time and time again. It does cause, wild convulsions in the middle and lower end of society, and the middle and lower end of society sort of collapses on itself and gets remade as something else. But this international, incredibly moneyed class, this class of people that's so wealthy that no government can touch them, it has existed for more or less 400 years uninterrupted, and they've survived every one of their own crashes. It works. Not gonna say it doesn't.
What would you say?
That's the frightening thing is that this is what I always say. The frightening thing is that sort of collapse comes, and then the ruling class isn't hanged. That they manage to get away with it again. That's what really scares me.
Well, what would you say the origin of this class is then? If you say 400 years, are we talking about like the first imperial British overclass after the looting of the monasteries by Henry VIII? Is that what we're talking about, or?
Oh no, it's the really from 1694 on. From the founding of the Bank of England. It really is this. It really is the finance class, the people who control the money supply.
Okay, well then that would make sense. Well, what's interesting is that there's been a couple really good articles up on the website lately. Otto put together the long-term budget outlook part 1 and 2, and then I think Z-Man had a great article on the repo operations the Fed is doing.
The Z-Man, I think the Z-Man got that story because I was talking about the repo market, creation, the repo markets and the creation of $500 billion out of thin air overnight. Of course, Z-Man goes out of his way to say it's not out of thin air, but it's just, for all intents and purposes, they created, $500 billion out of thin air. I think he read the same Salo Forum story that I got that from because, or this has just become a topic of conversation again, all of a sudden recently. But, the theory that the theory that the Salo Forum guy was operating under was that, the international finance class, because basically sort of what happened is there was an event recently that caused both I think it was the yield rate on the dollar, was the yield rate on the T-bill to drop and the value of the dollar to rise at the same time. Or there was some event happened that is theoretically impossible according to, conventional economic theory. And they were, searched around in balance sheets and everything, and he found what he believes was evidence that, basically what, if you know what the repo markets is, the Fed had announced something like something like a $600 billion repurchase repurchase agreement on Treasury bills, and they had about $126 billion of it repurchased, and then one night something happened, and the next morning all of the rest of that liquidity was gone, and the conclusion the Salo Forum guy came to was that overnight the Federal Reserve essentially bailed someone out to the tune of $500 billion, like probably one or just a very small number of actors just bailed them out overnight to like a tune of like, well over half of an Obama bailout. And it happened more or less off the books. Like there's no public story. The public will never find out what happened because the world of international finance is so labyrinthine and closed that they're not really beholden to anybody at this point.
Well, you see what they did was they threatened a recession. And there's been talk of it in the financial news for the past month. It's like, oh, the economy's not looking too good. And now all the stories are rosy. It's like, oh no, everything's looking great now. So it looks like they went and shook down some politicians, to get this bailout. So. And
whenever they say the economy, you have to understand that they don't mean the economy. They mean the stock market.
Yeah, that's what they mean. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Jared Howe's been talking about this for a little while, like a month or two. So that's where I first started hearing about this back in probably late October when this started happening. I don't know when they started doing this, but I heard about it relatively recently from, alt libertarian types. It's finally happening. Got Dancing Ron Paul. I think it was the Orthosphere a decade ago who came up with the terms, the real economy, the moral economy, and the fake economy. So obviously, like all this financial shenanigans is just completely fake.
Yeah. Main Street doesn't see these great things. Wall Street's doing great. Main Street's like, where's the prosperity? That's always the story.
Right. Well, that's kind of what Tucker's been on about lately. But also just, supposedly, more money's been made trading financial derivatives of petroleum products than actually, selling actual honest to goodness oil. And you gotta ask yourself, wait a minute. This is just gambling on oil prices, and supposedly that's more valuable.
It's only gambling if you don't know the outcome already. So the average person that dips into the derivatives market is more or less gambling. Like you or I could go, we could, download the Robinhood app onto our phone and, buy a bunch of silver trust futures. And, that's gambling. I mean, you can even look up all of the, the technical data on these, all of the, various indicators, the Greeks, all of these things. It's still gambling. It's informed gambling at that point, but it's gambling. The people who are really making money on these things, they're all in one another's phone book, and they're just, they just use Telegram to talk to one another about large movements in the energy markets and the money markets and the repo markets, in the debt markets. It's like most of this movement happens in financial markets that are for which the barrier of entry is so high that the average person simply cannot touch them, simply has no hope of ever getting there. Like if you want to invest in treasury bills, like if you want to go to the Fed and buy treasury bills from them, you have to purchase these things in lots of 5,000. And so, I mean, you have to have you have to have a significant amount of money just to even be able to get your foot in the door here. And then, to be able to handle the kind of capital that causes large movements, one way or the other, you have to have an incredible, you can count the number of people who have that kind of money in the United States. You can fit them all in one little booklet that's the social register, and they all know one another. Insider trading is just sort of what happens whenever somebody does something that isn't approved by the rest of the club.
No, that's exactly right. And by the way,
club sells them out.
insider trading does not apply to Congress. So if senators or representatives, pass bills that will benefit one company and make their stock skyrocket, they could turn around and buy that stock, because they're the only ones, because it's beginning in their committee. They're the only ones. They're the first people to know this is about to happen. And insider trading laws do not apply to Congress. So that tells you something right there, that they're exempt from equality before the law. So they have knowledge that can really make millionaires into billionaires, don't they?
Well, this tells you that you can't vote for Joe Biden, because how do you spend 40 years in the U.S. Senate and not be rich?
Oh, I mean, he is rich. It's just he just doesn't show it on his actual balance sheet,
Oh, okay, well that's true. He's probably got a lot of it in,
overseas, Ukraine. Like in Ukraine.
Yeah. How much money has Joe Biden got in Ukraine?
I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question. Probably got Peruvian agricultural futures as well.
Right. It's one of those things where, like, people always talk about, Donald Trump isn't worth that much money. I'm like, Donald Trump isn't dumb enough to, keep all of his assets in his name. He's just the pinnacle of a pyramid that stretches out so far. It would be, it's probably difficult to imagine where the actual boundaries of Trump money are.
Of course it is. But but how did they get all this money? Okay. How did Donald Trump and Joe Biden and all these, and Buffett and everybody else get all their money?
Economic rent.
Bucked out operations. It's absolutely no different than Goodfellas. Isn't it Goodfellas where they bust out that restaurant and they slowly just suck all the value out of the restaurant and eventually set it on fire? Am I thinking of the right mob movie?
No, yeah, I think that's right. Is that the one where you see them messing around with the light bulbs when it's time to, for Jewish lightning to hit the restaurant?
Mm-hmm.
They're like attaching things to like light bulbs and stuff. They're going to do their arson correctly.
Yep. That's all it is. Is a bust out of the American middle class.
There are different tiers of wealth, and different tiers of wealth go about making their money different ways. There's the underclass, which gets it all in government benefits. There's, the working poor who, like, that's the wage cuck. Then there's, sort of salaried middle, what still exists of the middle class, that, they're usually salaried professionals, and, they make some money from capital. And then once you get up into the sort of the London, the Bank of World, it's not the Bank of England, what is the insurance house? Lloyd's of London considers you to be wealthy, just rich at this point, when you have $25 million accrued assets. So $25 million accrued assets is where you can, you're at the point where you can basically live entirely off, capital gains and that sort of thing. But if you want to press beyond that point, into the 700 million to $1 billion range, that's whenever you start engaging in this sort of vulture capitalism, or these sort of blowouts. But I mean, there's a point that you get past that, and now you're in like Warren Buffett country, where you have more money than the damn banks do. And at that point, all you do is work within the system. Like, these laws are set up to allow you to manipulate the system however you want to. So you're not doing anything untoward according to the rules of the system anymore, because the system is set up to allow you to make these moves at your own discretion.
Well, to do a neo-reactionary class analysis, to understand the different economic classes, there's a couple of concepts you need to know. And that, one is that, the production, it's production versus predation. Okay. So the way that honest people make a living is by producing things that are useful to their fellow man and then voluntarily exchanging them. Right. So they're actually creating real value that fights off scarcity, the original enemy of mankind. But the other way to make a living is as a predator, where you use force and fraud to extract that value from the person who produces it. Okay. So you got the producers versus the predators. And a second thing you need to know about all economies in the West is that you have wage earners and then you have asset owners. And the rich do not make their money through wages. And that's why, things like, income taxes, that they're sort of missing the point. The rich make their money by owning things, pieces of paper.
If you hear people talk about what's called a capital gains tax, a capital gains tax is because what is the highest bracket of income taxes in the United States? It's around 30%. So if you're making, I think it probably goes a little higher than that, but that's income tax on earned income. Capital gains tax is what happens whenever you buy an asset, you buy a chunk of assets and you don't touch it for I think it's a year. After a year, whatever gains, assuming you haven't sold it or anything like that, you just hold it. After a year, all of the gains that are made on that initial investment are taxed at an incredibly low rate. It's like 4 or 6% or something like that. And so that's the capital gains tax rate. So as you become less dependent on income, you actually start paying less and less taxes out of your personal accrued cash gains.
Yeah, there's a couple more tricks with assets that I want people to understand, or at least hear of, if they've never heard of them before. One of them is that a corporation only pays taxes on what it has left after it pays its expenses, which is completely different than a regular household. A regular household, you get taxed on your income, period. Right? You don't get taxes, you don't get taxed on what's left after you've paid, your mortgage and your groceries and the light bill. You get taxed on what you earn, period. Full stop.
And you get sales, in most states, you get sales taxed as well. So it gets taxed coming and going.
Yeah. And then the second thing is, remember that when you invest in the government, they decide that's tax free, because you're lending them money. So you can always invest in municipal bonds as a rich person and avoid paying any taxes whatsoever, which is why these plutocrats, they do pay less taxes than their secretaries.
And again, remember, like I said, to be able to invest in municipal bonds or to invest in state bonds or to invest in treasury bonds usually have something of a yield. Municipal and state bonds usually, the amount that's made on them is usually targeted to keep up with inflation more or less exactly. And so it's you basically get a net gain of zero. But to invest in any of these asset classes, you need a shitload of money up front.
Well, that's the real division here. It's like, using these principles I've just told you about, you can assemble a picture. And, the first thing we got to do is we got to get rid of that left versus right BS. Okay. You've been told all your life, if you're a normie, we've been neo-reactionaries, dissident writers for over a decade now. So we understand this. But the average person still believes that you have a right party, which represents the wealthy upper half of the country. And then you have a left party that represents the poor lower half of the country, right? So it's rich versus poor. And they actually believe this nonsense. But really, who is producing? Is it the underclass? Is it the upper class? No, they don't produce. It's the middle class, the people that actually work for a living and produce value. These are the people keeping us all alive, and they're in the middle, right? So what you have is, you have the upper class and using democracy, quote unquote, to get the underclass to help squeeze the value out of the middle. And that is the most basic neo-reaction, class analysis. That you have a productive middle class, which is predominantly legacy. They're legacy white, legacy Christian, here in the United States. And, notice how academia, the government workers and the underclass, they can all kind of agree, what's the most evil thing in the world? It's a white Christian